Welcome to The Debate. Today, we're diving into the brilliant loop laugh comedy skit, Love Goes Corporate. It's a piece that hilariously and maybe a little uncomfortably satirizes this modern tendency we seem to have, applying business and economic ideas to our most personal relationships. You know, the sheer absurdity of it when intimate human connections get subjected to corporate language. That's what makes it so striking, I think. So our central question for discussion today is this. What is the most significant underlying critique or message conveyed by this skit? Is it mainly about how relationships themselves are being, fundamentally corporatized? Or is it maybe more a profound critique of the pervasive, really demanding nature of modern workplace culture, which then sort of bleeds into our personal lives? I'll be arguing that the skit's main impact is its critique of the corporatization of relationships, showing how these deeply personal connections are being fundamentally redefined and maybe even devalued by business logic.
Okay. I understand why you'd focus there. I mean, it's definitely a huge part of the skit's humor. You can't miss it. However, I guess I come at it from a slightly different angle. While that corporatization is undoubtedly present, I believe the skit's more profound message is actually a critique of modern workplace culture itself. It sort of illuminates how the relentless, performance-driven nature of our jobs subtly forces individuals to superimpose these work values onto their personal lives. It compels us to apply these metrics even where they so clearly, almost painfully don't belong. It feels more about how work shapes us, and then we, in turn, shape our relationships through that lens.
Okay, let's really get into that redefinition, though, because what I'm suggesting is that the skit's primary critique really targets the direct redefinition of relationships through applying these corporate metrics and language. It transforms them into these, transactional, efficiency-driven ventures, right? Instead of genuine emotional connections. The humor, for me, just pops from the stark juxtaposition of business jargon with really intimate actions. You've got Marcus acting as this HR manager in this bizarre romantic scenario, and he just bluntly states, your Q1 cuddles were under quota.
Right.
You missed the KPI for handholding, and honestly, your kiss productivity rate is slipping. I mean, when he says Q1 cuddles, he's obviously referencing a first quarter business review, literally applying performance targets to affection. It's absurd. And KPI for handholding, that's a key performance indicator, treating intimacy like it's some measurable business goal. This isn't just a work is bleeding in. It's about love itself being measured, quantified, and, found wanting by a spreadsheet.
Mm-hmm.
This really points strongly to a kind of dehumanization of emotion, fostering this purely transactional view of emotional investment. Think about Devin's complaint, remember? About emotional inflation not being accounted for on some graph after he buys flowers. He actually expects quantifiable returns for an emotional gesture, as if flowers are like capital investment or something.
Yeah, that bit's funny.
It is. And then there's the assertion that affection ROI is lagging, return on investment for crying out loud, and the board is demanding more consistency. This isn't just someone bringing work stress home. It's the fundamental restructuring of relationships around this idea of perceived financial success and the dismissal of an IPO of pure passion because, and I quote, net intimacy is still negative. That just vividly underscores the shift towards a purely economic model for love.
An IPO, an initial public offering, is when a company first sells shares, right? To even think about love in terms of a stock market launch, only to shoot it down because the net intimacy, the overall emotional profit is negative, that truly captures how our most personal connections are being fundamentally changed, not just influenced, by this corporate lens.
Okay, I absolutely agree that the juxtaposition of that language is where a lot of the humor lies. Yeah, and the redefinition part is certainly a very visible element. But what I'd argue is that the skit's more incisive critique, the sharper point, is really directed at modern workplace culture itself. how it reveals the demanding, performance-driven nature that subtly forces individuals to superimpose work values onto their personal lives. To me, the HR manager's final line, "Love isn't a job, but everyone's treating it like one," that serves as the skit's most direct, most potent commentary. I don't just see it as describing the outcome that relationships are becoming jobs, but more as a powerful diagnosis of the cause. It points to a societal trend where the structures of work are being inappropriately imposed on personal life. It feels like it's highlighting the pervasive influence of work, the conditioning we get day in, day out at the office.
Just think about the resignation scene. Marcus declares, "I'm resigning. This relationship is toxic workplace culture. No PTO, no bonuses, no promotions." Okay, yeah, it parodies breakups, obviously. But more significantly, I think, it comments on the demanding nature of modern jobs that often do lack such benefits. PTO, paid time off. I mean, that's a basic employee benefit. The absence of these perks in the relationship analogy and framing it as a toxic workplace clearly suggests that work itself, the actual experience of many jobs, is the root cause of this kind of transactional thinking and that feeling of being undervalued. Even Devin trying to justify overtime on Netflix dates as double time, that subtly highlights how deeply pervasive work demands really are, pushing people to think of even their personal downtime in terms of work-like compensation.
The humor here, I think, stems from the audience recognizing how much work dictates their own lives and these sort of learned behaviors they pick up, not just observing how love is changed in some kind of vacuum.
I appreciate your focus on the conditioning aspect. I do. But I'm still not quite convinced that the final line primarily diagnoses the cause as workplace culture. When the HR manager says, "Love isn't a job, but everyone's treating it like one," I really hear that as a commentary on the outcome, that relationships are, effectively, becoming jobs.
The humor lands precisely because we see relationships acting like jobs, which is a powerful symptom of their corporatization, isn't it? The skit doesn't just show work bleeding in, it shows love being fundamentally transformed by that bleed. It feels like a summation of the danger, the absurdity of applying corporate structures and expectations directly to love, demonstrating how relationships are losing their intrinsic emotional value, being kind of drained of genuine connection in favor of measurable performance.
I respect that interpretation, but I'd still argue the emphasis is on the how individuals are treating love. The line, "Love isn't a job, but everyone's treating it like one," feels like a powerful diagnosis of the source of that behavior. It's the pervasive, demanding nature of modern jobs that conditions individuals to treat everything, including love, as if it's a performance metric or a business venture. The skit's humor isn't just in the raw absurdity of relationships acting like jobs, but it's also in the recognition of this learned behavior that we pick up from an often overbearing work culture. It's a societal observation, really, on how our professional lives fundamentally shape our personal lens, almost unconsciously sometimes.
Okay. Let's maybe look at those performance metrics more closely then, because this is where, for me, the redefinition feels most stark, most unavoidable. Metrics like Q1 cuddles were under quota, or KISS productivity rate is slipping. I mean, that's the very heart of the skit's satire, isn't it? They expose the inherent absurdity and, frankly, the dehumanization that occurs when you try to manage and quantify intimate, emotional acts with business tools. This isn't merely about applying work anxieties to love. It's about the fundamental redefinition of love itself. Love becomes this set of tasks, a project with deliverables, rather than an organic, unpredictable emotional experience. The critique lies in how love's intrinsic value just gets eroded when you subject it to this external, quantitative analysis. It's about what love becomes under this framework, basically, an enterprise to be managed, not felt.
Yeah, I agree. These metrics are totally central to the humor, and they are, in their specific application, utterly absurd. But where I see it differently is why they're funny. I think these particular metrics land because they reveal how deeply ingrained workplace performance anxiety and evaluation have become in our personal lives. The skit humorously reflects how people who are so accustomed to constant assessment and the pressure to meet targets at work just unconsciously transfer this anxiety and this whole framework to their personal relationships. The punchline is that shock of recognition that we already feel this pressure from work, and the skit just takes it to an extreme. So it's a critique of the sheer extent of corporate culture's influence on our psyche and our daily thought processes, pushing us to constantly measure, optimize, and perform in all areas.
It's the constant pressure from work that makes us internally start applying these metrics to everything, even subconsciously.
But isn't that exactly how relationships get corporatized in the first place? The constant internalizing of metrics, the expectation of ROI on affection. It fundamentally shifts the nature of the connection. Okay, now let's consider that line about poaching a new partner. Fine, I'll poach someone from accounting. They've got better assets anyway. This scenario, for me, just exemplifies the commodification of partners. A direct and honestly, pretty chilling consequence of viewing relationships transactionally. Poaching is literally when one company tries to steal valuable employees from another. Here, a person is treated as an asset, just a valuable resource that can be acquired or replaced based on their perceived value or their ROI. It feels like the ultimate expression of love as a purely economic exchange, where emotional connection becomes secondary to perceived utility or our market value. It's quite bleak when you put it like that.
It is bleak, yeah. And that's a compelling point about the commodification. The language certainly points that way. However, I'd still argue this exchange points more towards a cynical, competitive approach that's learned from the corporate world. It's a world where individuals are constantly evaluating returns and replacements, not just in business deals, but tragically in all aspects of life. So it's a critique of the values that get instilled by a demanding, resource-driven corporate culture, which encourages seeing people, all people, as resources rather than partners or individuals. This mindset then inevitably bleeds into personal choices, not necessarily because love itself has transformed into a business, but because the individual has been molded by their work environment to approach all interactions this way. The behavior becomes a symptom of an unhealthy work-life balance where the corporate mindset just permeates everything.
The humor there is in recognizing that we're so conditioned to this competitive resource acquisition that it almost becomes our default setting, even in romance.
I'm still not entirely convinced that the skit's main impact is only on the influence of workplace culture. The humor for me still really springs from the absurdity of the direct application. The specific language, the KPIs, the resignation letters applied to romance. This isn't just influence. It feels like a radical, often hilarious redefinition. The skit forces us to confront how truly absurd and dehumanizing it is when a kiss productivity rate becomes an actual metric. It fundamentally changes what a kiss means in that context, doesn't it? Turning it from an expression of affection into, a performance target. That transformation of meaning feels like the heart of the critique for me.
And I'd still maintain that the humor is precisely in recognizing that we already do this or feel pressured to do this in our work lives. And the skit simply exaggerates it to expose how much those behaviors have infiltrated our personal lives. That HR exit interview isn't funny because relationships are literally becoming HR interviews. It's funny because we recognize the language of control and performance from our jobs being applied to something it so clearly shouldn't be. The skit effectively holds up a mirror to how our demanding workplaces are shaping our very way of being and how easily we adopt those paradigms even in our most intimate spheres, often without thinking.
Okay, so my takeaway then is this. This skit powerfully illustrates how the insidious application of corporate language and metrics is fundamentally redefining the nature of love. It's transforming it from, hopefully, a genuine emotional connection into something transactional, efficiency-driven, with profound and often darkly humorous consequences for how we actually experience intimacy. It's the state of relationships themselves that feels like the primary target of this sharp and, undeniably entertaining critique.
And my position remains that the skit's more profound message is really a critique of modern workplace culture itself. It reveals how its pervasive, demanding nature compels individuals to inappropriately superimpose work values and structures onto their personal lives, making them treat love as if it were just another job, even when, deep down, they probably know it shouldn't be. The humor highlights the extent to which our professional lives are kind of colonizing our personal spheres, often without us even realizing it's happening.
Right.
Well, ultimately, whether we emphasize the redefinition of love or the pervasive influence of work, the Love Goes Corporate skit certainly compels us to consider how the logic of efficiency is quietly, or maybe not so quietly, encroaching on our most intimate human experiences.
Absolutely. It definitely leaves us to ponder what, if anything, remains truly outside the reach of the corporate spreadsheet these days. Our discussion today has certainly shown the richness of the skit's commentary, I think, and how it encourages us to examine the forces shaping our most intimate connections. There is certainly more to explore in the material, and the skit offers plenty of room for continued reflection. That's for sure.